This is a bit of biology with Mr. Rock, and today we're going to be doing a Unit 3 review on cells. The first thing that we're going to start off with is the cell theory, and there are three main principles with the cell theory. Number one, cells are the basic unit of life. This class is biology, and in biology we study living things. So with that, cells are the basic unit of living things, so they're going to be pretty important in this class of bio. Second is that all living things are made up of cells. So if there's going to be a single organism or a single thing that we're studying in this class, and that thing is a living thing, that means it's made up of cells. And then finally, all new cells come from pre-existing cells. This happens through the process of cell division, so either mitosis or meiosis, but new cells come from old cells. Three main ideas of the cell theory. Up next, we're going to talk about the organelles. To be clear, we definitely have gone over more organelles than the ones that are on the board right now, but these are ones that I felt were the most important throughout what we've learned this year. So the first one is the nucleus. Nucleus stores the DNA. A big thing to remember here, though, is that the nucleus is only in eukaryotic cells. So prokaryotes do not have a nucleus. Eukaryotes do, so the nucleus stores the DNA. Next, we have ribosomes. You would remember ribosomes from our DNA unit because they perform the process of translation, which is making proteins. So they take an mRNA strand and turn it into protein. Chloroplasts and mitochondria, you're going to see that in the next video, Unit 4 review, energy flow, but these organelles are responsible for energy conversion. So the chloroplast does photosynthesis. It takes sunlight energy and it makes glucose. Glucose is stored food energy. So it's stored food energy, and then mitochondria takes that food energy that we call glucose and it converts it into ATP. In the process of glucose into ATP, that conversion is called cellular respiration. Cell membranes actually deserve their own slide when we're talking about cells, so you're going to see more of them on the next slide, but this is a barrier for the cell, and it regulates what goes in and out. Lysosomes are going to break down waste. The reason why I put them up here, they deserve their own spot, is because they are enzymes, so they break things down. And you would have seen something about enzymes in our Unit 2 biochemistry review video. And then finally, the cell wall supports the cell. The cell wall sits outside of the cell membrane, but it is only in plant cells and it is only in bacterial cells. Like I said, cell membrane, it gets its own slide. It's pretty important and it has a huge role in helping the structure of the cell, the structure and the function of the cell. So to bring it back, cell membrane, it's made up of phospholipids. So phospholipid right here, it's got a hydrophilic head, that means it likes water, and then it has hydrophobic tails. So one head, two tails. It's called a phospholipid bilayer because the heads point inward and outward and the tails face each other, like you see on this picture. Lipids are part of the cell membrane. It's called phospholipid. So the tails are lipids. And then another macromolecule that we're seeing here in the cell membrane is proteins. So proteins can be receptors, they can be channels, and they can act as gates. So the two macromolecules we see in the cell membrane, lipids and proteins. So a big role of the cell membrane, besides just creating the barrier with that phospholipid, is regulating or choosing what goes in and what comes out. So there are different ways that things can move across the cell membrane. The first is passive transport. With passive transport, things are going to diffuse across the cell membrane. So there is no energy needed and there are no protein channels needed. So an example of this would be something like oxygen gas. Oxygen diffuses across the cell membrane because it's a really, really tiny molecule and it's able just to go across the phospholipid bilayer. No energy, no proteins for passive transport. Facilitated diffusion. It is similar to passive transport in the sense that you don't need any energy. Molecules are moving from a high concentration to a low concentration. However, in facilitated diffusion, you do need protein channels. So an example of facilitated diffusion would be osmosis. Water moving across the cell membrane. Water cannot move across the lipid tails. The lipids hate water, so the water can't move across. The water needs channels called aquaporins, and the water moves from high concentration to low concentration. And that process is called osmosis. So it's facilitated diffusion because no energy is required, but protein channels are needed for the water to move across. And then finally, we'll finish with active transport. Active transport needs ATP to move molecules across, and also it needs proteins. So active transport is moving from a low to high concentration, so it's the opposite of diffusion. Maybe active transport is exo or endocytosis, moving out or moving in really, really, really big molecules that just can't go through these little tiny gateways. So active transport, you need ATP because it takes a lot of energy to move these molecules across. So these are three ways that molecules move across the cell membrane. And then finally, I just want to go over the different types of cells. So the biggest distinction that we have is we have prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So like I said at the beginning of the video, eukaryotes have a nucleus, prokaryotes do not. An example of eukaryotic cells would be things like protists. Those are unicellular, so they're only one cell big. But multicellular organisms would be animals and then plants. An example of prokaryotic cells would be bacteria. Because eukaryotes have a nucleus, they're allowed to be a little more complex. So they're allowed to be multicellular. They're allowed to be specialized. Eukaryotes also have the advantage of having membrane-bound organelles, things like mitochondria and chloroplasts. So this allows them, mitochondria specifically make ATP. So this allows the cell to be more specialized and more compartmentalized to do specific functions. Prokaryotes do not have that advantage. So prokaryotes do not have mitochondria, they don't have a chloroplast, they don't have any membrane-bound organelles. For this reason, they always remain unicellular. They don't have a nucleus. They're overall pretty simple organisms. They're not complex. Finally, just the difference between plant and animal cells. Two things I would point out here. Both plant and animal cells, both of them are eukaryotic, so both of them have a nucleus. And then one thing that's not on the board, but I would point out, is plant and animal cells both have a mitochondria. So both of them have a mitochondria. The differences between them are plants have chloroplasts, animal cells do not. Plants have a cell wall, and plants also have a very, very large central vacuole that mainly stores water. So these three things that you see on the board are what plant cells have, and animal cells do not have chloroplasts. Animal cells do not have a cell wall. Animal cells do not have a big central vacuole. This has been a bit of biology with Mr. Rock. I'm signing off.